To help prevent injuries on the playground, child care centers should provide hazard-free environments. In order to do this, one must be able to identify a hazard. There are a variety of general hazards common to many types of playground equipment. We're going to discuss the following major types: sharp points, corners, and edges, protrusions, and pinch, crush, and shearing points. Play equipment should be smooth and free of splinters and slivers that might cut or puncture a child's skin. Covering or plugging open ends of tubing helps keep inquiring fingers out of harm's way, as well as preventing insects from creating homes. Metal edges should have rounded caps or be rolled. Frequent inspections are important to prevent injuries caused by sharp points, corners, or edges that could develop as a result of normal wear and tear on the equipment. Another major concern for playground equipment is corrosion. Metal should be painted or galvanized to prevent rust. In 1978, the Consumer Product Safety Commission banned the sale of paint containing hazardous amounts of lead. According to Title 16 of the Code of Federal Regulations, if you are concerned about potential lead-based paint hazards with your play equipment, contact your North Carolina DCD consultant for guidance on lead hazards and assessment. It is important to remember that despite these federal regulations, lead paint hazards with playgrounds has been discovered with equipment purchased as recently as 1991. Now let's take a look at wooden play equipment. A possible health risk to children from wooden play equipment treated with chemical chromated copper arsenate, or CCA. The preservative is effective against rot, fungi, termites, and most other insects. The CPSA believes there is a risk to young children who play on CCA-treated playground equipment, as they could pick up arsenic residue on their hands. Then the children put their hands in their mouths or on toys, food, or other objects that would go into their mouths. To minimize the risk to children, caregivers should thoroughly wash children's hands with soap and water immediately after playing on CCA pressure-treated wood playground equipment. In addition, children should not eat while on the playground equipment. Due to recent action by the Environmental Protection Agency and the wood treating industry, wood used in playground application is no longer being treated with CCA. Although the EPA has not concluded that there is unreasonable risk to the public for these products, they do believe that any reduction in exposure to arsenic is of course desirable. Some new alternatives to CCA are alkaline copper quat and copper azole. These new generations of preservatives are designed to perform and handle the same as CCA pressure-treated. Protrusions and projections on playground equipment should not be capable of entangling children's clothing. Protrusions and projections have been involved with serious injuries and even death due to strangulation. Children can die from strangulation if their clothing drawstrings become entangled with these hazards. The Consumer Product Safety Commission recommends to clothing manufacturers the following voluntary guidelines. They advise the manufacturers to eliminate drawstrings and to replace them with safer alternatives such as snaps or Velcro. They advise parents to remove drawstrings from the hoods and necks of jackets and sweatshirts and to shorten drawstrings around the bottom of garments. As with many playground hazards, once you know how to identify them, you can begin to remove them. Playground safety researchers have developed various test methods and instruments to identify protrusion hazards. These hazards are identified using protrusion test gauges. The size of the protrusion test gauges are designed to prevent injuries to the following parts of the child's body. Number 1, the small gauge prevents injuries to the head. Number 2, the middle gauge to the eye sockets. And number 3, the large gauge to soft tissue areas including ribs, stomach, and side. The dimensions for making your own set of protrusion gauges can be found on page 12 of the 1997 U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission Handbook, also provided in this module. Now let's take a look at how you would use the gauges to test a possible protrusion. If you have an exposed bolt or component on your play equipment that may entangle children's clothing, use the following testing method to determine if you have a hazard. Starting with the smallest of the 3 gauges, try to fit the gauge over the component. If the smallest gauge does not fit, move to the next largest gauge. When one of the gauges fits over the suspected component, look and see if any piece of the component extends beyond the face of the gauge. For example, at the bottom of the screen, you can see on this possible protrusion, gauge 3 fits over the component and there is still the yellow part exposed, which means it is a protrusion hazard. Removal of these hazards may be as simple as cutting long bolts shorter or replacing play components. There are some special protrusion concerns to guard against. Anytime the diameter of a protrusion increases as you move away from the initial surface, the potential for a hook-like effect occurs. For example, on the top of this slide, there is a component or multiple aspect protrusion decreasing in size as you move away from the initial surface. All parts of the component protrusion pass the 3-gauge test. The component protrusion on the bottom of the slide also passed the 3-gauge test. However, notice how the protrusion increases in size as you move away from the initial surface. This protrusion fails the protrusion hazard test because it causes a hook-like effect and may entangle children's clothing. Another general hazard is pinch, crush, and shearing points. These occur with play pieces or components that move against one another or move relative to a stationary component. Our goal is to prevent children from having access to these points. Equipment that might have pinch, crush, and shearing points include merry-go-rounds, seesaws, spring rockers, sand diggers, clatter bridges, steering wheels, tire swing chains, and tricycle go-rounds. Special attention should be given to this type of equipment so we can guard against those inquiring hands.